everybody. Donna Schwartz here from the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I am so happy to have Leah Concialdi here. We were supposed to meet at the NAMM Show 2025, but a whole cacophony of mess happened during that show for both of us. And, but the cool thing, I have her here live on the podcast. So happy to have you here, Leah.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited we could finally link up.
Yeah, it's really cool. We're both from LA right now, so that's awesome as well. And Leah is an endorsed artist for P Mauriat Instruments, who's sponsoring this podcast. Thank you so much. You're going to hear a lot about their new model, the Venus model. This is going to be really awesome. You're going to love this, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. But you know what, Leah, I want people to get to know you. So do me a favor. I'm really curious about this myself too. When did you start playing music? Not necessarily saxophone, because you may have started on another instrument.
Okay, so I started playing saxophone in between fourth and fifth grade. So my parents took me to saxophone lessons so I could get started on the instrument. But once everyone began in fifth grade, I was a little bit ahead of the curve. And this ties into the type of saxophone, because you're just talking about starting younger kids on clarinet.
Yeah.
So when I would be going through different honor band organizations, extracurricular outside of school band, there were like 5 different band programs.
Wow.
Very type A and motivated. I have been that way since I was a child. So I'd be like, man, like I want to get out of the intermediate band, but there's so many alto saxophones. So could I play tenor now? And they're just like, no, you're in 6th grade. Like I had the strategy figured out. Alto players are a dime a dozen. Like, can I play the other one? And then, okay, fine. Like I'm moving up organically in the different ensembles on alto. And, that we could get into it later, but that kind of tied into my strategy of falling in love with baritone saxophone and primarily playing Bari these days.
Got it. Got it. Okay. I'm seeing the writing on the wall. So, but what's striking me too, though, all this extracurricular stuff outside of school, you're lucky because most people don't have that.
Yeah. So, I feel like I grew up in a very good era to be involved in extracurricular. There was still government funding and programs that I was involved in Colorado. So, I'd have my school band programs, and there was an organization called Colorado Honor Band that had everything from extracurricular beginning band all the way through, kind of like a year-round all-state ensemble with the symphonic band, symphonic orchestra ensembles. So I was really lucky to be involved in those, even like the beginning band that just sees the writing on the walls, like, oh, this is a little kid who's still a beginner, but they just love music. School band isn't enough.
Yeah. That's
Also, another organization, CCGAA, Colorado Conservatory for the Jazz Arts, that was jazz oriented, like very combo oriented. So that really helps students. They're still going to this day. Both organizations are. So, when you want to learn to play with a combo setting or you want to start writing your own compositions, that organization like really brought up the best of the best in Colorado music.
That's incredible. I never heard of this before. And I know like Darren Ron very well, but I don't know if he came up through that or whatever. That's really interesting. So who were your early mentors then?
Definitely my high school band director, Orlando Otis. He is incredible. He's just one of those, teachers. They should make a movie about this man, just teaches you. It sounds cliche, but like music and life. I just have like all these Mr. Otisisms that are still in my head, like characters, what you do when nobody's watching, and making sure people were punctual, making sure people are accountable, making sure you're checking in on people outside of the classroom. And I know students that I grew up with, graduated class in 2005. I'm dating myself. But who still take his lessons to heart. So he was an early mentor, and I actually ended up student teaching for him
Oh, cool.
out of college and running his elementary feeder program. That was career number 1 for me.
Oh, so you have a music ed degree.
Yes, music ed and classical saxophone.
Oh, got it. Okay, cool. And so how long did you ran that feeder program? How long were you doing that?
I did that for about 3 years.
Got it. Okay. And then what happened after that?
I did not want to be married to a teaching job in the suburbs and was, just wanted to foster the performance side of my life. I was playing, and we'll get into this more later, I'm sure, but, my eyes had kind of been open to a whole world like, oh, you don't only play classical or jazz music as a sax player. Like you could play in reggae bands, you could play in rock bands. Like I was just so into this stuff and playing with like some bands who were touring a little bit, playing pretty prominent shows throughout Colorado. And that doesn't really go hand in hand with waking up at 5 and 6 in the morning to
Yeah.
be a band director. So, I just kind of had a realization, I could always renew my teaching license. This will still be here, but, I was in my early 20s. So I wanted to pursue performance, and, kind of live it up in my 20s. And then that kind of went hand in hand with my future journey, to live the double life that I currently do as a saxophone player and music publicist.
That's awesome. And, one aside that I wanted to make too, I mentioned the NAMM show before. It stands for National Association of Music Merchants. It's a music industry type of thing. And what a lot of people may not realize, there are a lot of jobs in the music industry. We're always told when we're very young because we see the stars on TV or YouTube now or whatever that, oh, it's either performance or teaching. It's not that. There's so many things out there people don't even realize. And we're going to definitely get into the whole music publicity stuff too, because I've never had anybody on that talked about that, which is really cool. I'm curious though, I'm curious about the classical performance degree as opposed to, maybe jazz performance or something like that. What made you choose that?
Back to my type A kind of competitive personality. I'm really good at sight reading. I love it. So, I just kind of saw that as like my number one skill set. I love playing in the larger ensembles. It breaks my heart just with like the saxophone's history that like it's still such a young instrument. Like all these heralded classical excerpts and orchestral excerpts, all the string players and trumpets and brass and percussion, they would go through their orchestral excerpts class, and there's like, here's your 20 ever saxophones. So, I did couple that with a music education degree because I was highly inspired by Mr. Otis, my band director, and knowing that there's not really a viable career as a classical saxophonist, but
Yeah.
I just love all of those wind ensemble pieces. I love watching a big ensemble and hearing like an alto saxophone solo so clean and clear. And I nerd out playing, even just like the excerpt books, like Furling's 48 Etudes, Let's Go, the Select Studies, the Guy LaCour Etudes, those are wonky and fun. And like to this day, I don't play that out, but like I still love playing that just for fun. And when you don't have the bandwidth to have like a 3-hour practice routine like you used to, sometimes you're like, man, I just want to take like a 30-minute break today and I'll still open those books. And it's good to keep the sight reading up, even though you're not playing in a classical ensemble on the day to day, like that's lots of studio musician gigs or lots of, you know, yeah, hired gun gigs. Like, here's a book. You have to know how to read it. We're not going to have a lot of rehearsals. You might just show up. Like, you need to have that in order.
Yeah, yeah, and for sure. And I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because sometimes you will get charts, you get arrangements. I'm just curious as to, like some of the people that you've played with in terms of those situations, how much lead time you've had with those books. And I'm hoping that they also gave you like, scratch recordings or something like that for a reference.
Yeah, like I know like a lot of like the pop gigs or like, if you're playing with like a larger audience or like you're playing especially like in the backing tracks, like where, you're essentially before you're out on those tours or out on those big festivals, you'll go in and, kind of record some horn parts just to fill out like the tracks because like you're playing these massive stadiums or arenas. So in that situation, you're kind of working on arrangements beforehand. You have charts, just in case the section gets bigger. Um, or, you're swapping players in and out. Sometimes tours are divided up amongst multiple players or, something happens and you need to enlist somebody out. And yeah, so like in those scenarios, like you do have charts beforehand. But I've also been in scenarios where like it'll be, oh, we're just going to play a gig with standards and like someone will send you a PDF that day. If you're lucky, like,
Yeah.
here's 100 horn charts. If you're lucky. I've also been in gigs like, and this is kind of an LA thing too, like, oh, we're just going to play covers tonight. We're just going to play standards, like all good. So, it's a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff you've played beforehand, but all of a sudden, like you're with a section you've never played with, or, again, like I don't have a 3-hour practice routine like I used to. So I'm like, oh, well, I got this call last night. All of a sudden I have to go into a scenario where I could be playing who knows how many songs. So it's fun. It like, it's a whole different side of your brain where I'm just like, okay, I could listen, like we could make stuff up on the fly, like you exercise those improvisational charts, but I'm a chart person. I love it.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. Also, like you get these last minute calls for gigs, right? And if you're a solo horn player, it is easier because you have so much freedom. You could do what you want. But when you're in a
Yep.
section, you don't want it sounding like Dixieland when it's pop music, So it's also keeping that in track or in check as well. And not
Yeah.
even maybe even knowing the players. That's the other thing too.
Yeah. And it's always so interesting too. Like, I feel like in those scenarios where it's, oh, we could play like 30 songs in a night and it could be any era, any decade, any array of covers, it's cool sussing out that dynamic. So, I primarily play baritone saxophone player, or I primarily play baritone saxophone. So if I'm in a situation like that and like the trumpet player is just like killing, I could tell like, they're a little bit more like dialed in with these tunes. I'm like, I'm, the auxiliary horn in comparison, like I could take your lead. At the same time, if you're in like a 4-person horn section, it's like, oh, okay, like the trombone player has that one dialed in. Oh, hey, I know like these Amy Winehouse songs, like, you can follow my lead. So it's kind of cool, like, hey guys, we're all in this together.
That's cool. That's really cool insight. We've never really spoken about like that aspect on the podcast too. And even what you said before about if you're touring, if you're playing with big name people and you're playing large stadiums, you're recording horn parts. Are you so for this is not a generalized thing, but I guess in certain situations you are playing the tracks as well, in addition to having the horn sections, or no?
Yeah, I've been in situations where like you record the tracks as the horn section, even if they have like a demo MIDI horn line, of course they're going to take that out, get that replaced with real horns, but they'll have those tracks going. And I've also been in situations where, they pull them out entirely, like live horns will play that. I think that's just kind of at the jurisdiction of the artist and the MD, producer, and sound crew, what are you working with venue wise? Like, is this going to be too much? Does this space so big or so boomy where like, you need that extra layer, even if it's super tucked in?
Wow. Okay, let me ask you this question then. So let's say, you have a show, big venue, and you do have to play along with the horn tracks that you all recorded. Then you guys have to keep it super, super tight, matching that, and then that's a whole other skill set.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you have to be dialed in and, have those sight reading skills, have those listening skills, be really tight with your intonation because, you
Yeah.
know, if you're taking any liberties, which I love scenarios where you do get to take liberties, but, that needs to be a little more dialed in because, if you have different inflections or different articulations and, these house systems are still blaring horn parts,
Yeah.
that might stand out a little bit. So,
That is very interesting. And let me ask this question now. You did some gigs with Harry Styles.
yeah, just some festivals, not like
Yeah.
full-blown tours.
Talk about that though for a second. So I think you did Coachella with him. What was that like?
I mean, that was cool. That was baby's first Coachella. It was hilarious because literally a week before, um, I was talking to some musician friends and we're all just kind of like, yeah, would you ever play Coachella? I'm like, or no, would you ever go to Coachella as Gen Pop, like just attending? I'm like, no, like, I don't know if I could do that. I'm old, just not really. But I'm just like, but I would absolutely play Coachella, even if I'm like the last like billing, like, give me a little bit of bread, give me a ride. Like, yeah, I just want to say I played Coachella. And then like a week later, got the call like, oh, hey, are you available these days? Okay, cool. Do you want to play? And it was like three different levels. Like, okay, so here's the artist that it is. And it's like, oh, headliner. Okay, cool.
That is so cool. That's awesome. I'm curious about the situation too. So, all right. So you heard it was Harry Styles, right? What was the prep like? What was the experience like in terms of, you're playing for the headliner? Because Coachella gets insanely hot. Like people don't realize in April it could be 100 degrees in Coachella. It's really Indio, California. But like, what was the prep like? All that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it was cool. So it was me and three other horn players. We did like kind of that prep recording session. Actually, a colleague of mine from Colorado, a trumpet player named Paris Fleming, he was the arranger and kind of like horn section leader.
Got it.
So he worked with the MD like a little bit beforehand and kind of fleshed out some arrangements. And then it was me, an alto sax player, him on trumpet, and a trombone player. Like we'd record kind of those backing track parts and kind of demo, like, here's the horn parts for these festival gigs. Kind of us, the MD, Harry did pop in for a little bit. And I think there were six songs where it was like the smaller four-person horn section. And then there were two songs, two or three, I can't even remember at this point, where like there were I think up to like 12 horns. Like you could see him on stage, like
Wow.
surrounding him on both sides. And um yeah, that was just really cool getting to be a part of both scenarios. Like, okay, like we're in the smaller ensemble horns, like where we get to do like it's not even choreographed, but like, we're walking out to like different parts of the stage as opposed to like just doing the riser parts.
Yeah, I think I saw one of the videos, and so here's the thing though, like you recorded some of the backing tracks, all that kind of thing. Obviously there's charts, you're reading them, but you had to have them like memorized, right? In
Yeah.
order to do the other. Okay. Got it.
Yep. Yeah, and we did have plenty of rehearsals. That's something, an engagement that's as high profile as Coachella. And with the headlining slot, we did have tons of prep. Everybody had charts ahead of time. We went down to like around San Diego, did some rehearsals. There were dress rehearsals. And then even it was like the day before we like went actually on site, like and that was, when it really set in. I think with all of us, like even those who had played Coachella before, like, oh, like this is how big this is. So, we are testing different stage markers and like the full show, and here's what the risers will look like. So it was really cool. And it was such a meticulous experience that, everyone was thoroughly prepared.
That's perfect. I love the way you said that too, because what a lot of people don't realize, especially people that maybe play in like bands on the weekends, cover bands, all that kind of thing, where, maybe they rehearse once a week or something like that, but people don't realize when you have a top act like Harry Styles, excuse me, you said the word meticulous, and that stood out because it has to be at such a level. It's not like people are just going to walk on stage and just play. No, you guys have to rehearse this stuff because, it's entertainment.
Exactly. Like, and even, there was one song he was debuting, world debut, like had never performed the song before. Album wasn't out yet. So, even like everybody stands so still during this, like even though there wasn't like everybody in sync, like horn choreography, like just intention behind every element. Like it's not a gig. It is a full and thorough performance. So you need to pay attention to movements. You need to, how are you presenting yourself? There are huge monitors. So, don't look caught off guard if you make a mistake, or don't look confused. Don't look angry. You're putting on a show.
Performance, a full out production. It's a full out production. That is so cool. Do you have any, do you have any like fun stories from that experience?
I mean, not anything like,
You could say in public. No, I'm sorry.
yeah. Well, I mean, like nothing, honestly, nothing crazy. Like it's Harry Styles, he's a pop artist. It was very cool and very wholesome, but it was cool like having when else do you get to play with t 12 horn players? And, it's
Yeah.
lots of us like knew each other prior, or like, oh, we've like never shared the stage, and like this is the first time we're doing it. And then there were like a couple horn players from like different parts of the country. So, it was just really cool, eclectic backgrounds. Lots of hurry up and wait time, needless to say, with a production like this. So, it was cool. Like we got to hang out a lot. I got to like do my PR work when we're sitting for multiple hours on end, watch basketball. It was fun.
Yeah, that's another thing too. The hurry up, wait, hurry up, wait. Yeah, people don't realize like when you have major acts, they don't just come in at like if it's an 8 o'clock show, they're not coming in at 6 or 7. No, they're there like in the morning,
Yeah.
getting things going. And you're coming in as a horn player, I guess depending on the time, it could be 3 in the afternoon, it could be a little earlier, whatever. And you're working out things and then you gotta wait. And working out things and then you gotta wait. And the thing is this too, depending on the type of instrument you play, like I'm thinking as a trumpet player, you have to have solid chops because that's not easy, especially if you're doing a lot of high note playing. But as a saxophone player, if you use cane reeds, that's another issue in and of itself. You know,
Yeah.
that's why I do use Legere. I know a lot of people that use fiber reed. I know a lot of people that use Van Doren, D'Addario, all that kind of thing. But if you're using cane reeds, that's a whole other thing in and of itself. So, let me ask you, like on that tour, did you have to deal with those kind of concerns?
Oh, I used plastic cover, so we were
Oh,
good. Yep.
got it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another one.
So
Yeah.
I was like exclusively playing plastic cover in that era a few years ago. Now I like yeah, I was of course we're going to it would happen at some point, the sax nerdery, but at that point I was playing an SR Tech mouthpiece with plastic cover reeds. So like, that's just like so laser etched, plastic covers, you don't have to do the soaking and whatnot. So I was never that concerned. And these days I've split time between the SR Tech and an old Brillhart mouthpiece that I used in college. But now I've kind of gone back to the Jazz Selects,
Okay.
as opposed to plastic cover. Like I know I'm feeling like really tapped into that, like when I first started playing Bari primarily in college, and like this was my setup, and like that first love for Afrobeat music. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like home base. I want to be on this.
Cool. And let me ask you this question then, with the type of like the things that you're doing right now. Well, first we'll talk about the gear and then we'll get into the types of things. But do you have to worry about those issues about, the hurry up and wait, or is there a little bit less of the waiting time in between where you have to worry about like, your reeds and drying out and all that kind of thing?
With my current projects,
Yeah.
not really that much. I mean, it'll be my primary project, a group called the Neighborhood Orchestra, which is kind of an eclectic global meld of jazz, Afrobeat, Chicano music, hip hop, like we're across the board. We play lots of local festival type and community events in LA. So yeah, there are lots of scenarios, you're showing up to a big outdoor stage at like 1 or 2 p.m. and you don't play till 9 or 10. So, you have all that spacing, but I like to get the nice sound check in. I like to get super dialed. I like to get used to the space because every time is different, but I guess I've done it so long, and I've played gigs like that since college. I played in a touring Afrobeat band, a touring electro funk band in Colorado, where like I don't know, it's just kind of standard. Like, okay, early sound check, you'll have gaps in between, where you get to hit chill, but like I'm not like, you know, I'll put my horn all the way away. I don't want it sitting out hours on end. So
Okay, okay. That's good to know because and people don't realize like it gets insanely hot here, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You know,
yeah, and I'm like, what if I want to go eat somewhere? Like, I'm not going to leave this sitting here.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's cool because you do have like the padding to kind of like warm up again. Like, okay, we're like an hour and a half out. I'm going to get the horn out, get the reed right. get a little warm up going, go over any lines that I want to, and we're good to go. I prefer to have it stretched out like that as opposed to, a line check where you're rolling up, especially as a baritone player, that's often an overlooked instrument, or like you can't dial it in right, or like if you have like a trumpet or an alto, like their sound is blaring and like yours isn't on that level, like it's so frustrating to go through a gig like that, so I'd rather take the extra time to get it right.
And this is interesting that I've gone through line checks and stuff like that. They're stressful because sometimes you get a 10-minute line check, if that. And as a horn player, just as a horn player, there's never enough time, and it's never really, unless that sound person understands horns, it's never really dialed in. But for a Barry in particular, where you may not be able to cut through all the other noise and stuff
Yeah.
like that, that's extra stress.
Yeah, it always happens that way during a line check, and especially, not just within the band itself, but with it, like I was just saying, like within the horn section, like especially if you're playing something like Afrobeat or funk music, like no bias, but like the other horns, you've got to fit into the baritone sound. That's in a way, it's kind of like reverse lead trumpet. Like, you've got to kind of like match like my styling and articulation. And like if I can't hear myself, and if the higher horns are blaring, like it's honestly those gigs like that are the only times I'm performing where it's like this stuff.
Looking at the
Like
clock.
straight up. Like if I can't hear myself or it's a bad sound situation or, thank goodness it doesn't happen often, but I've kind of been on gigs where, you're like the first project of many and like, sound engineers are kind of out for lunch. I'm just like, where are you to turn me up?
Yeah, that's and it's so frustrating just to begin with, but to have that extra element in there too, for sure. And I'm just thinking too, I'm curious about this as well because I heard some of your videos and I can hear you in that horn section. And that's awesome because it's sometimes, you can't, but I definitely heard you with the Harry Styles. You were dialed in and some of the other stuff that I heard as well. When you go to when do you have the freedom to use your own like wireless sax you do? Okay. What do you use?
I have the Audio Technica, the AMT 300. I'm like, wow, I've used that one for so long, I almost forgot it. But, you have the receiver, it's wireless. And I prefer that one, even like having packs, like, I don't know, fashion and like I'm very intentional about like what I wear in wardrobe too. So, I don't always have like the most like mic pack friendly ensemble.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I really love the wireless mic that I have. It's very good and very bottom heavy.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Wait, I gotta ask. So AMT. So like I've used the AMT mics for a long time. I first had the WI5. This was when I was back in New York. Great mic. I know Richie Canada from Billy Joel's band. He used the same mic as well. So that was cool. And then I came out here. That one like actually broke on me. And then I got the AMT Quantum Mini 7, which is awesome, which is great. But then lately, I gotta say, I've been using the U7, the X5 U7. It's really awesome. It's really good. It almost sounds as good as the AMT, but you said the AMT 300. I've not heard of that model.
like, oh my goodness, I almost feel like we need to pause so I could like cite it correctly.
Or you know what? You just let me know and we'll put it in the notes
Yeah.
because I think, and here's why I'm getting into this. I mostly play tenor, right? And I used to play a lot more tenor and alto. So the
Mhm.
AMT, I just go back and forth and all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I feel like with Barry, that, you may be looking at other considerations. Like you may be, like you said, the AMT 300 or whatever it may be has that rich presence for the bottom. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So I don't know if that's something that, um, you've had to trials and tribulations with or whatever the case may be as a Barry player.
Yeah. Well, and so like I noticed that this one, and when you do have like the kind of foam covering over the mic, like that really helps bring like the bottom end to life. And like, yeah, this one's just so much more robust than, some of I've had like different all the horn players like have the same wireless on a gig, or it's just like, here's your pack, here's yours, like, and everyone's on the unison setup. I'm like, I don't like this as much, but sometimes you've got to use what they give you. Um,
That was going to be another question I was going to ask too. Okay, that's interesting. I guess I do a lot of like solo work, so I could see why they would have you on. All right. I guess I could see why they'd have you on the same wireless setup. I mean, I've been on gigs where people were using the same like in-ears, types of, but yeah,
yep.
bring your own, thing, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the same wireless setup. That's interesting. But yeah, in terms of as like a Barry player, you know, what your considerations for like wireless sax mics and stuff like that? Have you looked at other brands or you've just found this and it's been, peaches and cream since then?
I'm at a point in my career, and I think it's because, I split saxophone with running a music PR business. So, I don't have time to like demo as much gear as I used to. And I'm kind of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it mindset right now.
Yeah, gotcha.
But one thing that's interesting about this particular mic, I don't want to go into it. There's enough media out there telling the story. I've experienced horn theft twice in my life. Um, so the last time it happened, oh, I hate the fact that this is plural. It's like daggers in my heart again. Um, but they took my wireless mic. And so I had to procure a new one. And I saw that this particular system had a dual system where, you could have it's a singular receiver, but if you get two different mics, I could go from Bari to alto easier and like seamless. I'm like, oh, let's get that one. So I tried that out. But honestly, this mic, you have to adjust like some height and if you're too far in there, like I've definitely had to experiment with like some clipping settings, like, working with the engineers and they're like, yo, like you're going a little too hot with this one and it's cutting off. But all that said, is this mic works with alto, with tenor, with the Barry. I haven't really tried it on soprano, so it's almost like I don't need this dual system. I haven't gotten another mic to try it out with both sides because it's so universal. So I'm like, man, I don't even know why I did that, getting both. I think I was just looking for an excuse to upgrade and make light of the situation.
Yeah, but no, and I believe you too. Once you find something that works, you stick with it, because sometimes trying out too many things, it can mess you up in your head. You know what I mean? It just gets to be too crazy. Let me backtrack. I want to talk about, the neighborhood orchestra, the type of music you play, but in particular, you know, how this is, I was going to say how this is so different from jazz in a sense. I don't mean it that way. And what I'm trying to ask is that with these styles of music that you're playing, like your role in it, how improvisatory is it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so trying to think. We'll go light into the origin story, but
Okay.
um, I don't remember if this is when we were talking before we linked up for the podcast officially, or if we've already touched on it during the official interview portion. But growing up, there was so much polarity and it was so rigid as far as what you could do as a saxophone player. It was you could play jazz music or you could play classical music. So kind of, at the tail end of college, I was a little worn out and jaded. I'm like, okay, I can't really do much with classical saxophone, but I'm also not a jazz major. Okay, I'm kind of like, am I relegated to just teaching only? But I really like playing. I don't really, and I don't know, it's jazz education and classical education can be a little rigid. I was just looking for something else. Um, so, I kind of fell into discovering Afrobeat music with an ensemble that I was playing with, and it just really blew my mind. Like, oh, this isn't jazz, this isn't classical, and lots of it is based on hypnotic vamps and rhythms, like essentially a pentatonic scale. So, rather than having someone breathing down your neck, like, oh, you're not playing the changes, or like, no, let's do, you need to play this lick in all 12 keys, like, okay, cool. You might like, you're kind of using a palette of fewer notes. So, like, what are you going to do texture wise and articulation wise? And it was just such a free for music. Like I had never had this much fun improvising. I had never felt this much freedom, acceptance, and just like really falling into the hypnosis of it. So, oh man, okay, this is it. Like, how deep do you want to get into it? But, I can't talk about Afrobeat music without like it would be sacrilegious without mentioning Fela Kuti, who pioneered this type of music. So this is a little reverse. Like I fall into in love with the music sonically, but I've always been super into musicology and music history. So naturally, I'm like, okay, where did this come from? So then you learn about Fela Kuti and his life and his activism and just how much he stood up to corrupt government, you know, and he went through so much and endured so much. And like, I don't know, it's just been on my mind so much lately, especially in present times. Like, this man would get arrested every time he would write a song. He would get beaten, he would be thrown in jail. And just, oh man, we're not going to go down this spiral or rabbit hole, but just thinking of like our current climate and our current times, like, who would sacrifice that much?
Yeah, it takes a very strong person emotionally, mentally to do that, to do that, especially now. And if you think historically, not even just music wise, some of the people that stood up during times when things were very precarious and dangerous, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And like this tying into, I'm like, I knew that this would trail off into a little bit of a rambling, but
No, it's
uh, kind of tying into the initial question of what music I play now. And let's see, let's backing up. Your original question was my current project and how much is improvisatory. Oh, okay. I know how to tie this all together. So tapping back in. So, learning about the life and the legacy and the music of Fela Kuti, that just became such an undertaking. I love playing Afrobeat music more than any other style. Like I feel a calling, I feel something that's really cool about this music is there are individuals all around the world who have had similar experiences to me, both, musically or resonating with Fela Kuti's journey and everything he stood for. And they would go on to form like Afrobeat bands all around the world. And they would, use him as their North Star, like, oh, let's create music in this similar vein as a vehicle to talk about some of the issues, we're experiencing in our country or in our type of the world or, the world at large. Um, so there's just so many layers to this. So, you'd find out about like a different Afrobeat band in New York or one in Japan or one in Chile or, you know, everywhere. So like ever since I had like this little flip and realized like this is my favorite type of music, like there's so much purpose, there's so many layers to this, which has been since late college. Um, I've gone on to do several Fela Kuti tributes in both Denver and, out here in LA, we've done some in my band. Like I've connected with some really, really incredible people, like also on this level, also on a similar path. And so tying this into your initial question of freedom and flexibility, because I've done this so many times, like I often find myself in like an MD or arranger role. So I have probably 50 to 60 Fela Kuti songs charted out. But if you go to listen to any of his records or you go on any streaming services, his songs are like 12 to 30 minutes long. So
Wow.
when you're kind of putting together a program that's often like a Fela Kuti 101, or people who haven't heard this music before, you can't be playing it that long. So lots of what I do and lots of like my role in these tributes is like, okay, let's kind of think of a form, you oftentimes have like one or two horn lines, a vocal line, maybe a couple background parts to punch in. So, I've done a lot of meticulous arranging, both like, okay, let's do it this way, here's the intro part, here's these horn lines, this person take a solo, here's the vocals cue out, hey, like we are, and then like sometimes like, hey, like the vocalists are going to invite dancers up, or like, he's going to tell a really captivating story about his connection with Fela Kuti and this, that, and the other. So, it's not rigid, but someone's got to keep it together. When in this music, you often have like 16 to 20 person ensembles. You have two guitars, you have five or six horns, you have three or four percussionists. Like that's another reason why I love this music so much. So it's like, it is really the happy medium of like, okay, here's like your roadmap, but like if we get a little bit lost, like understand like, this get us back together, but like we've all got to move as one. You can't be so rigid and like, well, the vocals didn't do this, or oh, the horns came in early here, so like I'm going to go off of this. Like no. So it's the happy medium, and it's cool to work on this with different ensembles around the country in different configurations. And, eventually, I don't know, I kind of want to make these charts as a resource to everyone because this music is so important and so global. I'm just like, should I get to 100 charts and like, okay, here you go, world.
Wow. Okay. There's a whole bunch of things with this. And yeah, there's definitely an
Like, wow,
opportunity.
that went in many directions.
Well, listen, there's an opportunity with that for sure. But let me just ask this question though. You got five or six horns on a gig. Are you going off of charts in terms of particular horn lines? You are. Okay. Because I'm thinking to myself, if it's like, kind of I've not played Afrobeat music. So if you're playing like how free form really is it? Like in my mind, oh, okay, I'm hearing this thing, hey guys, da 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 da, ga 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 ga, and then you find harmony parts and stuff, but it's not that. You guys have particular lines that you're playing, and then you may have solo spots if you choose to do that. So throughout, got it. Okay.
Yeah, like a lot, especially in like Fela's music, like the horn lines are so prominent, so iconic, so punchy. So like you've got to have that. I mean, that's not to say I haven't reharmonized some stuff or, tried
Okay.
some different arrangements. But everyone's got to be really tight in that. And a lot of, he has a couple of sons, Femi Kuti, Seun Kuti, who are still out there, carrying on his legacy and writing their own music. And I was like, Femi's horn parts are some of my favorite horn parts in the world. And I was listening to him a couple weeks ago, and he has a new album coming up, but some of his earlier stuff, I'm like, he is writing in all unison, and that's so cool. Like usually you think of five or six horns and there's going to be crazy harmonies, but I'm like, whoa, like you just have these long sustained notes and everyone is playing that same note. So I'm like, oh, that's really unique. You don't hear that.
No, you
But
don't.
like there's a lot of, sections in different parts of this music where, someone might be taking like an elongated solo and there's lots of like punchy horn backgrounds. And, I'll always write out the ones on the original recording, but I think that's kind of a fun part too, if someone's like kind of hearing a new background line in their head, like, yeah, add some new stuff. And like,
Okay.
I also, as classical and textbook as I could be, I like experimenting with this. And especially like a band like I play in now who has, members who have Chicano and Indigenous and Japanese, like are literally across the board
Yeah.
with this ensemble. Like, I think the next time we do this, we're kind of at the point where I think it would be cool, like, let's kind of mix in like some different like global feels and global rhythms, um, and to take like some new spins on this, like, we're still going to play the same iconic lines, but I think as a whole, everyone's comfortable with the music enough. And, I think to kind of like hat tip to our overall ethos and, you know, band community spirit, like we could add another layer to kind of rearrange things style wise.
Are you guys, is it usually the same personnel? The reason why I'm asking that is because, just like a baseball team, that's the analogy I'm going to use, just like a baseball team, you have to gel. You have to, some of the best bands in the world is because the people gel, they know each other. They know each other like the back of their hand. So do you normally have the same personnel, or because you have, written charts, so to speak? And I don't know if people are looking at the written charts on the stage, but if you had to call in subs, you would probably be fine. But do you normally have the usual same personnel?
Yeah, and I mean that's why I like write out the form and like have the charts is, in those instances. So we use our same core band. Rhythm section is generally going to be the same through and through. So they now have a certain comfort level with this music. And generally, we have a three-person horn section in our original sets.
Oh, good.
But we might add a couple additional horn players. And in, the Fela tribute settings, we try to make it like the same horn players all the time. We add in a couple extra percussionists, we add in an extra guitar player. But, I think ideally in a perfect world, we want to keep this ensemble the same through and through because it's all like, okay, because that's when we take it to the next level and can add more layers to this. It's like, we've gone over the forms, we've gone over the charts, we know how to play this on a basic level. So ideally, the next time we do this or present this particular program, we could get a little bit more experimental as far as adding different regional flavors or rearranging or, adding even different sections on top of it.
Wow. The thing that's screaming out in my head right now. So you grew up competitive, right? And you had everything mapped out. You wanted to play the tenor sax earlier because you alto sax or dime a dozen, all that kind of thing. Everything's figured out. But now look at you now. You're playing in an ensemble. Yes, there's charts, so that appeases, the your background, your rich background, classical background, reading, all that kind of thing. Yet you have this option of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you were missing in all those earlier years.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because I think, like you hit the nail on the head, it's a perfect intersection of, and I feel called to like use that skill set, oh, okay, like here's the roadmap. I will do that work. A lot of people don't like doing that stuff or have the skill set for it, but, make it not so rigid where, okay, we could like mix up different soloists every time, or, there is room for improvisation, or, if the feed off the crowd's energy to extend sections. So, and that's what made me a little burnout, like in the super scholastic and music school setting, especially in jazz education, like, are you playing the chord changes? Or like, oh, like map out this lick in 12 keys. Like, of course that stuff's important. Of course that's great to your upbringing. And then, classical, like, I love this music, but like, how am I going to go out and do this professionally? So this really, I think, again, it was like I was called to this because it kind of merges the freedom and you've got to know your shit. You've got to have these horn lines on lock. And, it puts me in a role to utilize that background, but, not every show is not the same.
And that's the cool thing, and that's what leads to, to the freedom and all that kind of stuff. That's so interesting how that evolved. I'm curious though, the first time that you may have performed this type of music, it being very different than what you were used to. I wonder if like the nerve levels were really high, or maybe it's just excitement. I don't know,
It
you
was
know.
exciting. Yeah, the
Okay.
first time. Yeah, the first Fela tune I played it was one of his like bluesier sounding ones. I'm just like, okay, there's a minor third in this one. Um, yeah, playing that like, that ties it into like the jazz background. And, I don't want to dilute it and saying it's like, your first Jamie Ebersold book where like, here's your blues scale, you could play these. But, on a fundamental level, it was just I think not being like so tied into like traditional and straight ahead chord changes and being like having the freedom to like, oh, now you've got to like have rhythm and texture and think about build. Like that's my favorite thing about improvising in Afrobeat music is because you don't have, all these crazy chord changes and you're locked into these hypnotic rhythms. Like you get to go off and you have to be very intentional not coming out of the gate swinging like so in your face. Like, okay, how could I really build a solo? How could I add textures? How can I be intentional about rhythms? And it's also like lots of endurance on your face too, like with these long songs, with these robust horn parts.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting concept with that. Yeah, so I'm really curious. You play a lot of Barry and all that kind of thing. What, how did you get involved with P Mauriat, who's sponsoring this episode, by the way, and also the new Venus model? I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, well, it was great connecting with Jeremiah and the P Mauriat team. I've played their Barry since the 300 unlacquered version. Since I've played baritone, since I bought my own,
Got
and
it.
have just really been in love with that horn. And, it was kind of my publicist side, like knowing I hate saying how to pitch myself, but like, adding value to their roster. I'm like, you don't really have an artist who specializes in Afrobeat and some of this global music. So that's, how I could add value to them and what I wanted to showcase and how I've been using their horns. So, we made that connection then. Had been working on some stuff centered on Barry and my overall story. But he actually approached me saying that they have a new line of saxophones, the Venus. Here's the tenor.
Wow. So those of you that are listening to the podcast, I want you to watch this video because this is really a beautiful, beautiful looking horn. And at NAMM, I saw it, live and in the flesh, and it
Yeah.
was beautiful.
Like, yeah, and it was cool because, he's describing it, and as you guys could see who are watching, it's a 95% copper body, and then you have silver keys, and like if you're looking at it from a distance, like it almost has like kind of pink hues. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, so it's really unique looking. But just having kind of the sax nerd conversation with the Jeremiah, like okay, like why me in mind for this particular horn and what sonically, like what's it all about? And he's also aware of my classical background. So there's like a richness and a depth to it. Like if I put on a classical mouthpiece, you get the control and you get, that really centered tone. And then, if I'm switching over to like the new Jody Jazz mouthpiece that I got, like, oh, okay, like I could still rock Afrobeat and funk with this. So, I wanted, as beautiful as the horn was, like I'm just like, oh, I hope this works out. I hope this works out. Like I want to be the launch artist, but I had to make sure, it worked for me and like I
Right.
could authentically represent this instrument. So, thinking of my backgrounds being in classical saxophone and Afrobeat music, like it works for both. It's so versatile. It's so rich. Something that was interesting too, it had been a little while before since I had played tenor. And, I'm just like used to the resistance on Barry. So, I did have the keys. I took this to my horn tech and I had like the keys a little more resistance added onto the action and it feels perfect.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. That's really cool. Awesome. And so
Yeah.
now, okay, but when you're playing, where are you playing that horn? I guess I should ask. Are you bringing it to the Afrobeat gigs now, or are you still just on Barry and that?
Oh man, but I am a baritone player on Afrobeat through
Got
and
it.
through, through
Got
and
it.
through on the large ensemble projects. Like I feel weird if I don't play Barry, but sometimes we had this residency up until this year. We're kind of pausing that, but it would be on Tuesday nights, and sometimes we'd have the full band. Sometimes, it's a Tuesday night, and it would be fun to mix it up. And whether it was like me and another horn player, whether I was the only horn player, I'm like, I'm gonna play tenor tonight.
Oh, cool. Cool.
And it's cool, like because even though you think of Barry as a section instrument, I like gigs with Barry as the lead instrument. I'm like, I'll show you it's not a section instrument. But I'm just like, I have this new horn. I want to experiment with it. Like, oh, let's play these parts in B flat. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool. And just some of like the one-off calls that I'll get. Whether it's like a cover gig or I've done a lot of gigs where it's like a DJ playing with like one or two horn players. And usually, and that's a lot of like pop stuff or top 40 or, you know, old school classics where, you know, Vary's not top of mind or it's not really the horn for the job. So like I'm happy to have this horn and have the versatility because like yeah, sometimes you don't want to hear a Barry on that stuff or you're the only horn player or working with a couple. So like I bring this to extend my sonic palette.
That's really cool. And let me ask, in terms of, there's going to be two questions here. What mouthpiece do you normally use with that?
Yeah, so I just got oh man, I'm like what it's in the case, but like this Jody Jazz, the DV Shy.
Oh, okay, got it. The
Yeah.
Chicago one, got it. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Yep. This, like, I just dialed this in. I'm not going to lie. I was ha since it had been a while since I had played tenor, I was just trying to figure out like what sound I wanted and, dialing it in. I'd use some of the mouthpieces that I'd have, like Autolink, a Meyer hard rubber, some of the standard ones that like you're just gonna have on hand. I'm like, close, but not quite. But I feel like the non-classical tenor sound has really been dialed in on this Jody Jazz piece.
And that's like I used to use the DV metal. Now I have the DV hard rubber, but the DV Chicago one, that one I think has a little bit more of a depth sound, a little bit more of a darker kind of sound to that.
Yeah, and that's like where I do, since I play Barry primarily, like tenor that's a little too bright, like or rock and rolly. Like I think that's awesome for other people, but like that's just not me.
Got it. Got it.
So, but like I like playing metal pieces, on non-classical music. So that was really that was pretty much one of those scenarios where I take it out of the box. I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. This is gonna work.
That's cool. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it takes a while to find that, but
Yeah, like I was kind of struggling for a little bit where, getting the sound right on tenor because I'm just like, I don't necessarily know what I'm going for. I know like the different like pieces of the profile, but I know that like when I hear it, that's going to be it. And I feel like once I got that Jody Jazz mouthpiece, the combination of, these unique metals that the horn's made out of, coupled with that, I'm like, I'm a tenor player again. Let's go.
yeah, and you bring up a really interesting topic, and I recently spoke to Jason Gay about this as well, who's just a recent podcast guest. And it's really the topic of how to know which mouthpiece is right for you, because it's not a question of, metal versus hard rubber. You're talking about, sonic palette. You're talking about, and Jason talked about this too, like the sound you're trying to go for,
Mhm.
and um because you're predominantly a Barry player, there's a certain sonic palette, that you're used to. Because you play classical, there's also that part of you as well. And I'm not surprised that you're on the DV Chai because of that's a little bit, richer, a darker type of sound compared to like just the regular DV or especially the Superjet. That would not fit what
Yeah.
you perceive in your tonal imagination and stuff. So
Yeah.
so like advising people in terms of like mouthpieces and stuff, really, I think that the overall thing is that what's the sound you're going for? And a lot of people say, well, oh, I want to sound like David Sanborn, and they'll try to copy his equipment or whatever. But I think it's uh, uh, more, more detailed than that, you know?
Yeah, like yeah, for me, it was really just like carving out like the qualities. I don't want to sound like somebody else. I want to sound like me. Like, of course, you know, you want like I like so and so's tone. I like so and so's, but yeah, like for me, I wanted, something that wasn't too bright on tenor, and I wanted something that was still able to be controlled because of that classical background. If you have like a crazy wide open tip or a ridiculous baffle, that's not really like the background and how I like to control an instrument. Um, so, just kind of dialing that in. Like I want it to cut through, but I want darkness. I want control. I want clarity.
Yeah, okay. I like that word because in describing like Jody's mouthpieces, there's a certain, like I call it directness, but clarity also. Yeah, Yeah, that actually is really good. I'm glad that you said that because that's another good way for me to describe that. And going back to the P Mauriat horns and stuff like that. So the Venus is available for tenor and alto, if I'm not mistaken, right?
And I don't. I
I think so.
think I think they'll eventually roll it out to the to soprano and baritone, but right now this is available for alto and tenor.
Yeah, and actually that was going to be my next question because now I'm wondering, you know, well you already have a P Mauriat Bari, but I'm wondering if they do come out with the Venus model for Bari, I wonder if that would be something that you'd be checking out and
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like it would be interesting because like I said, the reason I wanted to work with P Mara is their 300 UL, the unlacquered baritone saxophone. So I actually was introduced to that saxophone and saw it for the first time when James Carter was playing it and came and did a clinic at my college. I was just like him playing around midnight on that horn. And that's also, that he'd probably be who I would mention, that horn, that tone, that instrument. Like that's how I modeled the sound I wanted on Barry. Um, there's just so much freedom in that unlacquered instrument, but it's still controlled, it's still contained. Like I don't feel like my sounds could go anywhere. I don't feel like, this could vibrato is going to be like uncontained, but like I'm never going to struggle projecting and I'm never going to struggle cutting through, if it's just me in a room or
Yeah, but you know what's interesting too? So like there's a theme here and it goes back again, it goes back to when you first started out. Um Knowing your path, right? Looking ahead, all that kind of thing, but also wanting, loving the classical music, wanting um that kind of control,
Mhm.
right? In terms of, the music and stuff, but then at the same time, how that can be so restricting. You were feeling that, so you have the dichotomy of I want the control, but it's constricting to wow, jazz, okay, it's also kind of constricting in a certain way too. There's more freedom, but it's a little more constricting to, oh, these styles of music, the world styles of music, the Afrobeats, all this kind of thing. You know what? Yeah, we have our horn lines that we do have to play. There's the control, but then I have the freedom to do what I want from
Yeah.
there.
Oh, and that's why I resonate so much with both this P Mauriat Venus and the unlacquered baritone that I play. Like, yeah, controlled yet freedom.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know what? Controlled yet freedom. That could be a great tagline, by the way. Just saying.
Dig it.
Gotta let Jeremiah know about that one
I
for
know,
sure.
yeah. And now I'm like, that's it, but it's not quite it. So now like I'm taking my publicist mindset to like, all right, we're going to make that better, but same
Okay,
vibe.
cool. I will let your publicist mindset do that. In fact, you know what? That's a great segue. I mentioned the very beginning about the NAMM show, about the music industry. It's not just about performers, it's not just about mouthpieces, there's other things involved. Can you talk about how you got started with music publicity? What you like about what exactly is your job, what you do, all that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So I am literally putting the saxophone down to discuss.
Got it.
So I got into music PR, fending for my own projects. So I guess before we go into this, explaining what I do, I work a lot with narrative building and getting artists. I'm primarily a music publicist, but prefer saying artist publicist because I do work with authors and actors. Like, do you have a good story that we need to get out there? We'll work with it. But I work with getting artists, media placements, everything from podcast engagements to appearing on television to everything from the New York Times to Questlove's podcast. So working with an eclectic array of artists and, really honing in on their story, what makes this appealing to media? What, how do you authentically describe their journey? How do you tap in with the right media people? Who align and like want to discuss this and would, craft a really good story. So I got into this field just fending for my own projects and backing up. I'm okay with admitting it now, but I resented it for years. I am honestly a naturally better writer than I am musician, I think. So growing up, like I'd always have English teachers like, oh, you're not going to pursue writing. Hey, are you going to do like a double major in English and music? I'm like, no, I'm not. Um, I didn't even know what a publicist did, but again, I was a classical major. I wasn't a jazz major, but some of the faculty from my university's jazz department, they're like, "Hey, Leah, you should be the publicist for our chapter of the Jazz Education Network." I'm like, "Why?" I'm like, I don't know what a publicist does, and they're like, "You're really good at writing, and you're really good at throwing parties." Touche. Okay, I'll give this thing a try. So it was cool. Working with some of the local media and like, oh, cool. Like, I just have to like email you and like authentically say this is really cool and this is why you should attend this. This is why you should cover this. And you get to exercise a lot of creativity because this goes beyond saying like, I'm a great musician. I have a great new album out. Like, no, you've got to give them something more. So like really figuring out like the right talking points and how this is going to not just resonate with media because you're going to be screaming into a void. Like, why do you want people and the public to be aware of this and hear your art? So, um,
Yeah, this is again, this is interesting because you've also going back to like, earlier, good, really good writing skills, and now you found a way to marry that with this. So, okay, so music publicity, PR, right? But it's not even just for musicians because there's also authors as well, and it sounds like podcasts too. So, give me like, a typical day. Like, what's a typical day for you? What are you doing?
yeah. So, I mean, it varies, everything from connecting with artists, and I'm a very artist to artist person. Like I work best when I have direct connection to an artist, like when it's musicians, I'm like, you could get as nerdy and technical as you want with me. You don't get to do this with other publicists. So, we could talk on like theoretical levels and we could talk about arrangements and we could talk about like, oh, okay, like you have a new live album out, how was this song arranged differently in this setting? And, how was the music director involved? Carve out those talking points. So, my primary roles, that's kind of like layer number one. You're carving out the narrative, you're carving out the talking points, you're assessing, who are your target media, where you want to pitch them, LA Times, New York Times, those big high level publications, local publications, podcasts, kind of like niche blogs, and special interest, trade publications, album reviews, if it is an album project, if you're doing tour press, ideally, you're getting advanced preview coverage to entice people to buy tickets and be interested in the project or, simple show review project. Those are kind of what you do when an artist is on the road. So you step one, build the narrative. And then step two, you take these talking points, you tailor them to every outlet and every individual you're reaching out to, and essentially pitching the project, pitching media coverage. And then, there's like the not so fun or, more necessary wrangling and herding cats aspect, like, coordinating those interviews, getting everything dialed in. And then there's the fun stuff that you see on Instagram that, you think is my entire career, like going to the shows, doing the media engagements, like running a press conference, like that's like the outward facing, like my job's so cool and it's so fun. But, it's lots of the nitty gritty, being in the trenches. And I think, I'm good. I like publicity as opposed to management or booking because there has to be, this goes back, this does tie in with like my competitive, just relentless type A self. Like the worst anyone's going to tell you is no. I am highly persistent. So, I like the challenge and I like the creative aspect of it too, because, if somebody's not responding to a pitch or like isn't receptive from it first and foremost, it's like, okay, cool. What are we going to feed them next? So, there might be an if I'm working with an art, it's like still in the developmental phase, that's not a household name or, you won't be enticed by the initial press release, or maybe you just listen to one song, like it's just not doing it for you, coming back and tying it in with like, okay, well, hey, now they're collaborating with this artist on this single, and I know you have specific interest here. Or, one thing, this is like the music marketing landscape at large, but I feel like the past 5 or so years, people have really questioned the value of music PR.
Oh, interesting.
In,
Okay.
in favor of like, well, isn't my money better spent on digital ads or social media marketing or
Oh, okay.
content?
Okay. Okay. So in other words, there's this conflict, with digital versus I don't want to call it old style, but yeah, in a way it kind of is.
Both traditional media outreach and organic. And like a lot of times, like people will come to me for a PR consultation or like, hey, can you help me get on playlists? And I'm like, I don't do that. Like that's very, what I do, that's, kind of hand in hand with distribution. But I don't reach out to jazz curator at Spotify.com, put them on the State of Jazz playlist. No. That's kind of like a team effort, but um going back to the current landscape, people have questioned the value of music PR because, it's not like it used to be. You don't wake up and go to www.myfavoritemusicblog.com anymore. Like, I really wish I got into this field 10 years earlier. But one thing that, I think I'm particularly attuned to and, maybe a little more skilled at than a lot of people in this field, just because I'm aware of this, is, how do you leverage these media engagements? Like, okay, cool. The New York Times wrote about you. You're on NPR. So how are we going to amplify this? Making sure, you know, when I'm doing some of the tour marketing stuff, like all the different venues you're playing through, like need to know about this big press hit, post this on your social media channels, working hand in hand, like, I might have connected with this writer for this article write up, but like, can we talk to the social team and like maybe produce like a set of slides for Instagram or, okay, artist, I know we don't like content. I hate it too. Love hate relationship, but like, you just got this big press hit. Let's like get you in front of the camera and like, let's talk about it. And then, link in bio, go read it. Like I love the leverage aspect of it and still remaining creative in that. And things, everything from just mass layoffs at media publications to, some of that stuff, people favoring social and content because attention spans are so short these days. Are you going to bitch and moan about things changing, or are you going to make it all work together?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm all about leveraging opportunities like, do you have an email fan list where, you could send this big article out to, and like I said, like feeding it to venues, like this is a marketing tool. Like, artists just got written up in the New York Times. Like you should be posting about this on your channels. Like this should be helping you send tickets. I'm making sure that management and agents have this. I'm extracting, the pull quotes from articles, every review they get, like I'm cataloging, here's what the critics have to say.
Wow, wow. There's so much with this, and I'm wondering, you were saying like the last 5 years, how valuable is music PR and all that kind of stuff. But it is because I think that especially now, people are looking for more authenticity.
Bingo, bingo. So that's yeah, that was like the next point in all of this is, kind of like the current landscape that we're living in, not even politically, but just like, we've been in an era where you're so inundated by information. You now have AI sites like writing articles, AI's prevalent. You don't always have like the most factual information. And, it's a whole different conversation, but like I do see lots of benefits to AI, but like not necessarily in the PR world per se. I mean, it helps you with certain stuff, but point being, like people are craving authenticity. And when you have, the opportunity to go on a podcast or, go on a news channel and have somebody tell your story or have a platform to tell your story, I think artists are seeing the value in that. And especially like lots of people are conscientious of where they're spending their money. Do you want to be feeding money to Meta and buying all these digital ads that aren't even performing as well as they did? Or would you rather have, this really beautiful article that you connected with a journalist who's invested in your story and took the time to craft this narrative? And again, if you have a good publicist and a good team, you're looking to leverage that and share that news in as many ways as possible.
Yeah, and that's something that AI can't do.
Nope.
I don't think it really ever, can. This is a human element.
Yeah, like because even and I get it. Like there's even the new Gmail plugin where like you could say like summarize this article or summarize this.
Yeah.
Like if you need to do that, fine. But you know, yeah, I think people are just like dialed into like their stories, burn out on like the nonstop content, burn out, opinions and viewpoints about social media as a whole are changing just because of, these people who have created them essentially. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but, I think people are just conscientious of, where their dollars are being spent and whose messages and viewpoints they align with, where, it's refreshing to read an article that comes from a genuine place as opposed to I'm doom scrolling and just like spiraling with everyone.
Yeah, wow, this is a really good topic, and in my head it's screaming for every single musical artist to be watching this right now, because the thing is that my I guess my question is, well, first of all, let me just finish that statement. Every musical artist who, struggling to get out there should be watching this podcast right now and should be contacting you. We'll have your contact information in the description. But my question is also, how do we, I understand authenticity, but everybody does look on social media, but how do you stand out without looking like a fool, without, you know what I mean, like doing stupid, circus act types of tricks, and I'm not just talking musicians, I'm just seeing it for everybody, just doing crazy stuff to try to stop the scroll. How do, how can people stand out? Because that's hard now. There's so much information. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and it is like again like a love relationship, hate relationship. Like I can't in the right mind tell artists like you can't not be on social media. Like
Sure.
it's necessary evil, but it is how people find out about stuff. And I find when I'm working, and again, like so many artists are different. I'll have like Gen Z artists like, oh, I'm going to post one cover every week, or like, hey, look, I did like a behind the stage thing. And like again, like I kind of work at the intersection of, I'm not a social media person or manager or, strategist per se, but I understand how it ties into my world. And, again, how I could leverage those things into, press pitching. But, I have artists like that, who enjoy it. But I also have artists who are just like, I don't want to touch this stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and in that scenario, I'm almost thinking, my job to amplify their efforts and, feed media tools. I almost like, okay, let's maybe focus on a show that you're playing. Let's get like high quality multi-angle video. Like we know you're going to kill this performance. And then like let's cut down like high quality professional video clips. You're still out there on social media, you're showcasing you're promoting your album, you're showcasing your talents, but that's not necessarily putting you in front of a camera and doing some of those circus acts. Like, that's authentic to some people, but it's also not. And then, when you do engage in those endeavors, like I was just working with an artist, like, okay, we like you have so many live streams that have been for, that you've done over the past few months, you don't miss when it comes to live performances. So, we kind of like need to make your overall marketing toolkit a little bit more robust, even when it comes to like sending venues like, here's a 30-second clip of you performing that they could use on social media, ads, whatever you need to do with it. Um, so, that was kind of one focal point, like, okay, we have this. And then, you know, in those efforts too, like, in pretty much every pitch that I send to media, there has to be a visual component, especially if you've never heard of this artist or if they're a developing artist, like you need to see them. So, kind of working hand in hand with the social media thing, like, okay, let's like ramp up your YouTube channel, or like, okay, we now have cut, like we have footage of this whole show. We've identified like 4 or 5 songs that are really, really good and stand out. We've cut them down into little clips, but like now let's like roll them out on your YouTube channel. That will, give me more ammo to take to media pitches like, oh yeah, like listen to them perform so and so at so and so iconic venue.
Yeah, this is so yeah, the part of this is the visual element and as you mentioned, you're not a social media manager, but you understand, what's going on with that. And I'm just wondering too, I know this kind of a little bit gets back to social media, but do you see I know people, are getting like kind of disgusted with I'm still going to call it Facebook, with Facebook and all that kind of thing. Um, but do you see people a lot of people are on Instagram. Um, some of the bigger people are on TikTok. I don't know in terms of, a lot of musicians being on TikTok, but do you see any of those platforms being better for publicity, for promotion?
I mean, so I use TikTok to like scroll through. I have a TikTok. I think I've posted one sax video on there, and when I wanted to like experiment with posting, I've posted my cats. Oh, okay, this is how you edit a TikTok video. I get it. And then like I'm like, oh, people like that more than my saxophone.
Oh, Jesus.
Uh,
Okay.
the value that I've seen in TikTok just through organically trying to look through it myself and, just feedback from artists or teams who are more like on the day-to-day level with that platform is I know lots of people do use it for discovery. They're very rooted in like their For You algorithm. And through just like messing around on like how, I'll scroll through it. I'm like, oh, I get like lots of like NBA clips that I like, or, it's showing me, um, you know, videos that I'm interested in. So I think that for like discovery, and artists more in that generation who are posting on that, on the everyday. And I know artists have gone viral on TikTok, and that's kind of helped them leverage their career. So I am not an expert in that by any means, but just because I'm not personally on it or use it with the artists that I work with doesn't mean I'm going to say it's stupid or it shouldn't be used. I'm almost fascinated by it.
Interesting. Okay, no, that's a great perspective. I really like that. And
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have like a remark about like the old school and like email list and website. Like maybe we could talk about that. Like, but after the question you were going to ask.
Okay, yeah, keep that in mind because I was just really curious too. I saw some of the media that came out with you with the Venus model for P Mauriat, and
Mhm.
were you a part of that? Like designing that?
Um, with like the actual graphics.
Well, not even just yeah, like the graphics, but also, because it was in the music industry rags, you know what I mean? Like the newspapers and stuff like that. So, did you have a part in that, in promoting that, or was that P. Mauriat's team?
Oh yeah, so they did like the different ads. But as far as, the photos that we took with that, I connected with a really excellent photographer out here, Sheldon Butler. He's amazing. And he was really like, so one thing I like about working with other artists or like other artists like see value in working with me, and it's kind of weird to say this out loud, but I actually have one artist in particular. He's like, man, like, I trust you as far as like your creative direction and like being present at photo shoots because like you know how to do this yourself. I was very intentional with like some of the out, like I wore this gold dress. It's really uncomfortable. It's like pieces, shards of plastic, and now the dress is kind of broken.
Oh my gosh.
Worn
Okay.
it all of twice.
Oh,
But I thought that that would look so cool with the Venus model.
it's so awesome.
Yeah. So I'm wearing this dress for these saxophone pictures. And then the other outfit I wore in that is just a nod to like authenticity on my part. Like, so my personal fashion style, I do make it very Italian and Sicilian rooted. Like, even if I'm wearing like Chicano or like West African accessories, like, that's elements of a different culture, but like my culture is very bright prints, you know, gold stuff. Like I just went on a tangent about it, but like people call it the mob wife era. And I'm like, no, like this is not a freaking trend, man. Like this is like how I've dressed since I came out of the womb.
We were talking before before the recording, we were talking about shared Italian heritage because I am half Italian, but I've got the split between Sicily and Naples, and you're Sicilian, so it's awesome.
Very much Italian, Southern Italian and Sicilian, but all that to say, like tying back into like being intentional about the looks for that. Like I'm like, I really want to like go for like the bold blueprint. Wore a necklace with the Trinacria. There's actually been like a couple of Italian saxophone players who have noticed that. Like, I
Oh,
like this saxophone because we like her. I'm like,
oh, interesting.
did that on purpose. I did that on purpose. So like, you know, this is a whole other tangent, but I used to like say like the duality of like being a musician and an artist and a publicist, but like there's no duality. It is all the same. And like I use myself as a prototype. And going back to like what, this particular artist mentioned to me that I thought was really cool and was honestly honored is like, if I can't do this myself as an artist, like, you know, how do you direct other artists to do the same? I've been in situations where with artists I work with on a PR level where it's like, hey, we need to blitz a last minute photo shoot. Like, oh, hey, you just got booked for this cover. I'm like, I know some locations we could go. Like
Wow,
I've
that's
saved this in
awesome.
my phone because that's just like how my mind works. Or, you know, hey, we have this studio in this location. I'm just like, yo, be yourself, but like, here's how I'm imagining the vibe and like, here's like some like inspo looks I think would look cool on you and just like knowing what you wear on stage and they're like, oh, okay, I've got it. Thanks for that direction.
That's so awesome. And this, to me, this is very invaluable. And like I said, a lot of our listeners, may not be performing, on tour levels or major venues or whatever the case may be, but there are a lot of listeners that do. And just, listen to some of the things that she's saying, especially key into the fact how she's talking about intentionally dressing for certain situations, and really thinking, because AI can't do this for you. Really
So it's
thinking about, yeah, thinking about, you know, where you want to be placed and how this can be visually appealing, because that's what breaks, that's what can stop the scroll, not in a stupid way, but, in an intentional way, which I think is really cool. Now, you were going to mention a point about email marketing and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. And so like, the whole conversation about TikTok and social media platforms got me thinking, you have to nod to the old school email lists and websites. You know why? Because you own those. These, as you saw with the whole TikTok fiasco, it
Yes.
could be shut down overnight. You lose, like, people have millions of followers on there. You lose that,
Yep.
and that's your only channel. You're starting from square one. So, like, okay, there's this philosophy or method in media and PR and marketing called the peso model. So there's paid media, there is earned media, there is shared media, and there is owned media. So I primarily deal with earned media. I'm not paying influencers to talk about an artist or an engagement. I am pitching media like you organically want to cover this. You're organically interested in this. When I secure media coverage for an artist, I am not paying for it. You think I'm calling up the New York Times like, hey, how much do you need to do this? That is not how this works. That is earned media.
Wow,
You know,
that's interesting.
paid media, the P for peso, that's when you're doing some of the advertisements or, you might pay for like a paid marketing package that like, okay, like this outlet might do a social media post for you or do an e-blast on their email network. So, that's kind of more like the paid partnership, shared media, social media, where you're using these platforms or, that might be, it's kind of at the intersection and, so it looks like a four-piece Venn diagram. I'll have to, excuse me. I'll have to show it to you, or like maybe we could put it on the screen for this. And then owned media. This is where I see a shift, kind of in people wanting to go back to authenticity.
So, I'm just curious, before you mentioned you wanted to talk about that point about like email and like old school and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to artists reconnecting or yearning for authenticity, especially with being inundated with information or, a little distrust in social media, it makes me think of this overall kind of PR and marketing framework called the PESO model. So it stands for paid media, P, earned media, E, shared media, S, and owned media, O. And I think people in that yearning for authenticity are kind of pivoting back to the O, the own media, which is your website,
Okay.
which is your email list, your fan list that you have garnered yourself. Because as we've seen with some of this stuff like TikTok disappearing and then coming back overnight,
Yes.
and just different, who owns these social platforms, some of that discourse. Nobody is going to take your website away from you. No one is going to take your email marketing lists away from you. So what I
Unless,
yeah.
hold on, unless, here's the thing, and I was having this conversation with Jason Gay too. Um, what do you call it? With your website, there are companies that, like I think Wix and Squarespace, where, they'll put up the website for you, and that's okay. Ideally though, you want a little bit more control over what you can put over those. I mean, you own them, but it's a little bit of a different format, so to speak.
Oh yeah, yeah, because like the word space and Wix and Squarespace, like these platforms to build the website, like they could be everything from like free templates to getting like nitty gritty. Like I know WordPress, like you could work with the designer and like make my website from scratch. And they are, and then domain hosting,
Yeah.
I hope we don't ever have to get to the point where it's like they're going after GoDaddy, like your domain address is compromised. But
Oh gosh, yeah, no, that's a whole other can of worms. But I just wanted to say too, I 100% agree with what you're talking about in terms of the peso model, in terms of owned, because and I say this to every single person I speak with that like tours, and I say to them, do you have an email list? No, I just use Instagram. No, no, do not do that. You don't own Instagram. How many times? And you could go and you could buy that verified little check mark and all that kind of thing. It doesn't matter. You could be shut down tomorrow and then you're toast.
yep. Yeah, exactly. And like, what I deal with and what PR is the earned media. So, what I was saying beforehand is I'm not calling a writer from the New York Times like, hey, how much does it cost to feature my artist? It doesn't work like that. It's a very authentic pitch, authentic interest from the publication, and authentic media placement. And then, when you're looking at this PESA model, you kind of see it's like a four-piece Venn diagram. And, there's like a gray or like an overlap area. So going back to like the leverage conversation, at the intersection of earned media and shared media, that's, does, if it's like a big outlet, like NPR, New York Times, like ideally, they're kind of doing like either a carousel or a reel, distilling like fine points from the article. And like you're going to see that's like millions of people see that on social media. Hopefully that leverages them to go read the full piece. And then, if you look at the earned and the own, like if you get a big press hit, like again, hopefully you're going to your email list of established fans who have opted in with a vested interest in your work and you're sharing that.
That's right. That's the way to go. That's absolutely the way to go, for sure. And with the peso, the shared part of that, that is social media.
Yeah.
Got
It's
it.
just, yeah. And, there's a little overlap and kind of, again, back to being like this weird hybrid musician publicist and knowing how to pitch myself and even going
Yeah.
back to connecting with P Mauriat, one thing that I'm kind of organically getting into that's not necessarily traditional publicity. Excuse me again.
And this is why I asked about the ads and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, so one thing, I've kind of gotten into with some artists is like brand partnerships, because that is very much like narrative building. Like when you're pitching brand partnerships, it's essentially like, why are you the person for this?
Oh my
Why does the
gosh.
brand want to work with you over, thousands of other people who want to be in the same position? So, in doing some of that work.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? Because, okay, you said something before, and this is so important, everybody. Um, when it came to P Mauriat and it came to this model, the Venus model. Now, the thing is, you've been playing P Mauriat, the particular model, Barry, you really love that. You saw James Carter playing it, that really affected you, all that kind of thing. But then you said to yourself, how can I add value to this brand? A lot of
Yes.
people all the time ask me about how do you get endorsed on it? How do you get endorsed by these people? And I always wondered that too. And then the way that I was getting endorsed by people was through authentically using their products. And, I would just say, hey, I use Rovner ligatures for the longest time. I recommend them to all my students, that kind of thing. And they're the nicest people on the planet. And, I only recommend things I use, you know,
Yeah.
but you took it one step further and you said, how can I add value to this brand? Because what people don't understand, these brands don't have endless bank accounts.
Yeah.
They have endorsed artists for a reason. And it could be that because do they have anybody that represents the Afrobeat community? No. Boom, you fit in right there. That's adding value to the brand. That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, there's a clothing brand that I'm in the works of personally working with. And, it was the same thing. This is founded by an athlete who now plays for a team in Denver, Colorado, but is from Los Angeles. I'm like, I love this brand. Like I wear it. It's like I've done photo shoots, like even outside of saxophone related work, like, like this is perfect in like regional wise, because you always need to think, in so many marketing decks and like something you should be aware of, like, musicians could go on Spotify. Like this is especially important of like when you're booking tours, where are you being listened to?
Oh, got you. Okay. Yeah. So you have to, when you're booking tours and stuff like that, you want to be thinking locally in that area and maybe doing the brand partnerships there. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah,
Or,
like I mean, this particular like this was kind of like another, just kind of like personal biz dev moment. I'm like, like who else would you have who like intersection of Denver and LA with a specific interest in your brand founded by this particular individual? Come on.
yeah, yeah, no, it's made. It's made in the cards when it comes to that.
Yeah. And so
This,
it's cool. Like some of like my PR artists, like, there's one who likes a particular brand of rum. So that's something we're working on now. And, you've also got to do like the due diligence and research and like see what they've done, see like the type of content they're producing. So I'm just like, oh, okay. Like you've worked with some big hip hop artists. So, you know, you see this artist I work with, I'm like, you have a look, you have a vibe, you are so immensely talented, and they're not doing, don't really have anyone in jazz. Are they interested in jazz? But they're interested, in like some of these lifestyle components slash like you tap your music and your message, like you're on the intersection of music and activism. So like we're like in that like ideation, like rabbit hole phase right now. Like I like garnered the interest, I have the contact, but I'm just like, oh, we've just got to like put the icing on the cake.
That's pretty cool, and that's where your creativity comes in, and that's something
Yeah.
that I don't think AI can do.
Oh yeah, and you know what? There a lot of people in the music PR field are kind of jaded, are kind of, resistant to get creative and explore other methods and are like so like, oh my God, I've like been like kind of like adjacent to other teams and like, here is how we pitch. Here is your paragraph to copy and paste. I'm like,
Okay.
we don't do that. I don't do that. My team doesn't do that. Like, yeah, like you're going to have like specific talking points, but like everything is so different. People yearn for, being pitched individually and like curating those specific pitches. Like, oh, hey, I know you've done this and this and this, and you have like this outside interest here. So like, why don't you do an article on this artist at the intersection of music and fashion, does not talking about their record, but I like those lifestyle pitches. And when it's like the right artist and like, oh wow, I just found like they're the same thing as like this pitching where I use myself as the prototype and make those connections. Like you are the writer for this job because nobody else is interested in like this very niche array of things. So like you guys are going to have a field day working on this article.
This is so cool. This is, I mean, I'm nerding out on this too. And I just, I think this is so awesome. And I'm just thinking about like all the people, that I'm going to be, as soon as we're done being like, listen, when this podcast comes out, listen to it, because I'm serious, because this is really invaluable, especially, now we're in a very transitory, we're in a very, a flux kind of moment right now. There's a lot of things going on. I'm not just talking politically, I'm just talking around the world and stuff, but also with how social media, is changing now. A lot of things are definitely changing over. And I think, some of the ideas that you have are really so relevant. Gosh, I am so glad again, I have to thank you for your time. I didn't realize how long we were on. This is so
Hey,
awesome.
we're talking about like I literally have two full-time jobs, so we could go a little long.
Yeah, no, it's all good though. It's all good because the thing is, even if you are someone who's, again, not playing big stages and all that kind of thing, but let's say you are in a weekend cover band or you're in certain type of cover bands or you're playing in a community band and you want more people to come to your show, listen to some of the things that we've talked about because you can do this on any level. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing about this. It's not staying in a box. It's trying to think of, I'll use the word intersection. How
Mhm.
could you tie this to something else, especially for people in community bands, thinking about how it could tie in locally? Like if you've got a local brewery company, right? And maybe they want to, support the community more. How can your community band tie into that? I'm just thinking off the
Oh
top of my
yeah,
head.
man, that's hilarious. That's another like very like niche Colorado thing about me. Colorado has a huge craft brewery scene, but I think I've officially worked on six beer collaborations
Wow. Okay.
with all with projects I've played in. Um,
Now that's cool. And
and yeah, that's another thing too. It's like, yeah, just think about interests of musicians and think of interest of your fan base. Like that's, use your fan base as leverage. Like, hey, my fan base, loves craft beer, or my fan base, is primarily, this culture or demographic. So like, let's partner up on this. Like that's stuff, again, that's not even traditional publicity. That's not even publicity per se, but it's all part of the game and something I've come to love because like you have to be inspired elsewhere and not just have interest in music. And same with your fan base.
Yes, absolutely. This is such great advice. It really is, for sure. Well, listen, Leah, before we go, how can people find out about you? Where can they find you? I hate to say it, on the socials, but also your website and
I
all
know
that kind of
it's
stuff.
social media. I see Peso, like I will provide a diagram of this from
Yes.
everyone. It's actually was cultivated, like the whole philosophies, this kind of PR and communications network spin sucks. But it's something really cool to think about. Like if, you're gravitate towards one lane of media, even like some people in the ad business, it's all full circle, is what we come to say. But
Yeah.
to your question, my handle on all social platforms is Saxolutely. It has been my handle and email address since I was 18 years old. Saxophone and Absolutely, Saxolutely. And soon enough, I'm doing a whole website revamp, but my PR business is champagnehousemedia.com. It's down now, but it will be up again real soon. And
That's your PR business, but your so like you don't have a website like leahconcialdi.com or something like that?
no, or I
Not
know.
yet.
You're just like, okay, you just discredited yourself.
No, not necessarily, not necessarily. But the thing is that no, that's not it. But the thing is that, like when people are gonna like search your name, we want to, like they'll find you on the socials and that kind of thing. Would the Champagne House Media be a venue or an outlet for you, to showcase your videos and stuff like that, aside from
Yeah, like, and again, like, you know, I think like the reason I used to like downplay, like, oh God, I can't be like too loud about like, yeah, I used to be a much more about like duality and separating the performance side from the PR side. And I think that's, a lot of people don't want to be too big or too loud. And it's like, no, like it's not duality, it is all in one. So like that to say, I
that's
am going to have like not traditional headshots up there. I'm going to have saxophone videos. And like again, I'm not afraid to express that side of myself as a publicist because like I'm the prototype. Like if
yeah.
I, again, like if I couldn't tell myself how to conduct myself or be creative at a photo shoot, or I couldn't secure my own brand partnerships, how could I really do that work for anybody else?
No, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, like I said. And this has been, well, it's been enlightening for me. And so I know it's going to be enlightening for other people. And I'm just thinking about, like I said, seriously, when we're off, I'm going to be texting some people
Yeah.
for sure. But I'm definitely going to also ask you for that picture of the Venn diagram because we do want to show that as well. And Leah, man, this has been so awesome. I'm so glad we finally had the chance to meet.
I know. Thank you so much. I was truly devastated to miss Nam. Like
I
work.
saw that in your post. I felt so bad for you, and I can't even imagine. I have not had norovirus. I've had stomach
Yeah.
bugs. I
It
can
came and
imagine.
went very quickly, but it was funny
Oh,
because I was
good.
even up until day of, like I was texting Jeremiah, like, I'm going to go to the doctor, like, or I remember telling him, I'm like, I might need to like sit out a little bit because I'm like queasy and like got really sick last night, but I guess I'm going to go to the doctor and see what's up. And they're just like, you have norovirus and you're highly contagious. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay, it's not right to be around instruments right now. Like, no way. Okay, I'm going to do what's right. I tapping out.
Jesus. Well, that's gonna listen. Probably next year, right? Next year they'll have you. Yeah,
Oh
that'd
yeah, and
be
I was
awesome.
just like, hopefully some more trade shows will make it happen.
Oh, for sure, for sure. All right. Well, listen. Thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate it.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.